When I was little, my Japanese grandmother used to tell me stories that felt like they came straight from the darkest corners of her memory. She would swear they were true, and the way her voice would drop when she got to the scariest parts made me believe her. One story, though, stood out from the rest. It was about a woman, beautiful at first glance, but hiding a terrifying secret. My grandmother said it happened to a cousin of hers, a man she knew well when she was young. She began the story like this. In the years after the war, when everything was hard, food, work, even trust, your grandfather's cousin Shigeru was living in a small town outside of Kyoto. He wasn't much older than you are now, maybe in his early 20s. And like most young men at the time, he did whatever work he could find. Running errands, delivering goods, anything that paid enough to get by. One evening, as he was walking home from a long day delivering parcels, the sun had already dipped below the mountains, and the streets were growing dark. It was late autumn, and the air was chilly, with a dampness that clung to his clothes. The streets were quieter than usual, and Shigeru felt uneasy. Now, my grandma, she always said that he wasn't the type to scare easily. He was strong, confident, but apparently that night, he felt like someone was watching him. As he rounded a corner, he saw a woman standing under a street lamp. She was dressed in a long beige coat, her face hidden behind a surgical mask, the kind people often wore to guard against colds and, during COVID. This wasn't unusual in Japan, especially as the weather grew colder. But something about her made Shigeru stop. She was beautiful, or at least the parts of her that he could see were. Her hair was shiny and black, falling neatly over her shoulders, and her eyes were large and dark, almost too perfect. When she noticed him looking, she tilted her head slightly and asked in a soft, almost shy voice, "Am I pretty?" Shigeru was taken aback, but managed to kind of stammer out, Yes, you are." Here's where the woman stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She was holding something in her hand, though Shigeru couldn't make out what it was. Then she asked again, "Am I still pretty?" Before he could answer, she pulled down her mask, revealing a horrific sight. Her mouth was slit from ear to ear, her lips ragged and bloody as though they'd been cut with a knife. The corners of her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, forming a grotesque, permanent grin. Shigeru stumbled back, frozen in terror. The woman stepped closer, her voice no longer soft but sharp and demanding. "Am I pretty now?" she asked, her mouth twisting into a mockery of a smile. Shigeru didn't know what to do. He wanted to run, but his legs wouldn't move. In a panic, he blurted out, "Yes, you're still pretty." The woman paused, her dark eyes narrowing as if considering his answer. Then she pulled a pair of long, gleaming scissors from her coat, the object she'd been holding, and raised them toward him. "If I'm so pretty," she said, her voice low, chilling and menacing, "then you should look just like me." My grandmother said Shigeru barely escaped that night. He turned and ran as fast as he could, the sound of her laughter echoing behind him. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the town, his lungs burning and his heart pounding in his chest. When he finally looked back, the street was empty. The woman was gone. Shigeru didn't go back to that part of town for weeks. When he finally did, He asked around about the woman, hoping someone else had seen her or could explain what had happened. That's when he heard the whispers. Stories about a spirit, a ghostly woman who appeared to men walking alone at night. The locals called her Kuchisake-onna, the slit-mouthed woman. According to the tales, she was once a beautiful but vain woman, one who'd been disfigured by her jealous husband. He'd cut her mouth from ear to ear, cursing her to wander the earth as a vengeful spirit. She would ask her victims if they thought she was pretty, and no matter how they answered, they were doomed. If you said yes, she would share her beauty by slicing your face to look like hers. If you said no, she would kill you on the spot. Shigeru never saw her again, but he was never the same after that night. My grandmother said he would jump at shadows, avoid going out after dark, and always carry a pocket full of candy with him. Something the locals said could distract the Kuchisake-onna long enough to escape. I asked my grandmother once if she believed the story was true. She looked at me with that serious expression she always had when telling these kinds of tales and said, "Look, your uncle Shigeru wasn't the kind of man to lie about something like that. And besides, there are still people who claim to see her, even today." She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Sometimes, late at night, if you're walking alone and you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. It could be her. And if she does appear, well, I hope you remembered. Always carry candy. And never, ever let her get too close." That's how she ended the story, and even now I can't walk alone at night without glancing over my shoulder. I was raised in Australia, but I've spent a lot of time in Japan. Part of me wonders if the Kuchisake-onna is still out there, waiting in the shadows for her next victim. Maybe it's just an old tale to scare children. But if you ever find yourself alone on a dark street and hear a soft voice asking, "Am I pretty?" well, I'd suggest you don't answer at all.